Okay, moving on to the next team in the Pac-12 that we will be going over today, and this is going to be the team in this conference that I am going to pick to finish in second place, and that would be Bobby Hurley and his Arizona State Sun Devils in his sixth year as the head coach at ASU. And I feel like since Bobby Hurley has taken over as the head coach of this program, they've been very up and down. They've had their good moments, they've had their bad moments, but I do think when I look at this year's Arizona State team, I think that this year's Sun Devil squad has a chance to be Bobby Hurley's best team since he took over as the head coach of the Sun Devils. And if you remember, a couple years ago, Arizona State looked like they were about to be a one seed. They had probably one of the best non-conference stretches I've ever seen by a Power 6 team. They went into Phog Allen Fieldhouse and beat the Kansas Jayhawks. They went into Xavier, who, if you remember, that year was actually a number one seed, and they went into Xavier and won. So Arizona State was really good that year. That's 3 years ago, 2017, 2018. Bobby Hurley led them to the tournament 2 years ago. They lost in the first round. And then last year, I feel like in the beginning of the season, it was a little bit of a disappointing year for Arizona State. They lost some games that I didn't necessarily expect them to win, but I wanted to see them be a little more competitive and maybe scratch out one or two big wins. They lost to Colorado, a team that I think they were on the same kind of path as. They also lost to Virginia. They lost to St. Mary's by 40. They lost to Creighton. They lost to Arizona. They lost to Oregon. They lost to Colorado. And I remember on January 16th, Arizona State was sitting at 10-7 overall and 1-3 in the Pac-12. And I remember saying to myself, what are we doing here? Are these guys any good at all? Because right now, when I watch the Sun Devils, they don't look like a very good basketball team. And Bobby Hurley has to do something in order to flip the switch with these guys. Because last year, when I looked at the Sun Devils, I thought they were a really talented team. And then all of a sudden, they went on a big, big run. They beat Utah at home, fine. They also beat Arizona at home, fine. They then go on the road to Washington State and lose. And I remember after watching that game, I was like, once again, what are we doing here? Arizona State just lost to Washington State. Super low-key. Washington State, I know CJ Elleby is going to be gone, but they did beat Oregon and Arizona State last year, so they deserve props. Washington State basketball hasn't had that good a stretch in a while. But anyways, Arizona State, after that Washington State game, they go on the road to Washington and win. They beat UCLA at home. They beat USC at home. They go to Stanford and win. They go to Cal and win. They beat Oregon at home, and they beat Oregon State at home. So ASU went through a nice 7-game stretch there where they won 7 games in a row. And I remember watching those games. They could not be beaten. And unfortunately, the season ended, so we don't know how Arizona State would have done in this year's Pac-12 tournament or NCAA tournament. But I do remember last season, right before the Pac-12 tournament, I did pick Arizona State to win. And the good news for this year's Sun Devil team is that they do bring back a lot of the key pieces from that team last year. The first one is Remy Martin, who is going to be one of the best players not only in the Pac-12, but in all of college basketball. The 6-foot senior averaged 19.1 points per game, 3 rebounds per game, 4 assists per game, and 1.5 steals per game, leading Arizona State last year. And Remy has been a guy that has played consistent minutes in the Sun Devil system under Bobby Hurley during all 3 of his first seasons at ASU. And I feel like that experience is really going to come in handy here when you look at where this Sun Devil team is, because it's always good to have a clear leader, and I feel like Remy Martin is that for the Sun Devil team. They also bring back Alonzo Verge Jr., the 6'3 senior, who averaged 14.6 points per game last year, 3.5 rebounds per game, and 2.3 assists per game. And I feel like this year, Alonzo Verge is ready to take an even bigger role, because last year, he was good and he got some quality playing time, but Arizona State had a guy like Rob Edwards. They had a guy like Romello White that they lose. So I think now when you look at it, that's going to give a guy like Alonzo Verge a little bit more of an opportunity to step up and get the job done. Speaking of the guy I mentioned earlier, though, Romello White, I was ready to pick Arizona State to win the Pac-12 conference in the preseason before Romello White decided to transfer to Ole Miss. And Bobby Hurley has been saying a lot of things about Jalen Graham and how confident he is in the center position. And it's nothing against Jalen Graham. I actually think that eventually by season's end, he's going to be a pretty solid player for this Sun Devil team. He, in limited action last year, actually had a pretty good season. But Bobby Hurley can't sit there and tell me with a straight face that this Arizona State team is better without Romello White, because Romello White, like Remy Martin, would have been a senior. And the frustrating thing is for me, I think, if you're an Arizona State fan, is that Romello White is going to be playing the same role that he would have played for this ASU team on an even worse Ole Miss team. We're going to get to the SEC preview in a couple days, but just to spoil it, it's not like Ole Miss is some top-notch basketball program. They're not bad, but it was just very confusing as to why all of a sudden Romello White decided to transfer to Ole Miss, because I do think if he was on the Sun Devil team, I would have picked them to win the Pac-12. But going back to some of the other guys they returned that I think in order for the Sun Devil team to hit their ceiling, these are the guys that I think are going to need to step up. The first one is Marcus Bagley, the 6'7" freshman, and he's actually the younger brother of Marvin Bagley, the former Duke freshman star, currently in the NBA with the Sacramento Kings. And I actually do think that Marcus Bagley, along with Joshua Christopher in this freshman class, is going to be a big key to this ASU team, because Arizona State, once again, Bobby Hurley could say all he wants about playing Jalen Graham at the 5 and how he thinks that's going to be an improvement over Romello White. But at the same time, I do think that given the personnel with this ASU team and given the trend, the way modern basketball is trending, I could see Bobby Hurley, especially with the style of play, the guard you aura, I could see Arizona State playing Marcus Bagley at the 5 as a small ball 5, and then just surrounding him with shooters. Cherry, Kamani Lawrence, Verge, Martin, Christopher. And I would actually be very curious to see how exactly that lineup would work for this Arizona State Sun Devil team. It would be very interesting to me, but ASU last year was really good down the stretch. They really snapped out of that funk they had early in the Pac-12 conference season. I'm curious to see if these guys could carry the momentum and do the same thing next year for these Sun Devils, because Remy Martin, Alonzo Verge, and Joshua Christopher should be one of the best big threes in all of college basketball. The question is, could Bob Hurley manage all these egos and say, all right, Remy, are you going to be good with maybe taking a shot or two less than years past? Same with Alonzo Verge. Same with Joshua Christopher. Is he going to be a guy who, as a freshman, comes in and expects as a top 10 recruit, who there were many different schools all over the country fighting for him? Does he think he's going to come in right away and just take a bunch of shots and the offense is going to be automatically built around him? Because if he thinks it is, he's in for a rude awakening. So I'm curious to see how exactly a freshman like Joshua Christopher is able to adjust to that kind of role. And then the other guys, Cherry, Lawrence, these are two guys that have came into this Arizona State Sun Devil basketball program, and they've been all right, but I think they could be better. Tayshaun Cherry, a former top 40 recruit, he's been a guy that I think kind of needs to do a little more dirty work and prove to everyone at ASU that he could ball and he could be a big part of the future. And I do think this season he has a chance to do that, maybe starting at the 4. And Arizona State's going to be one of the most fun teams in the country to watch, just because of the pace they play with, just because of the personnel and how much they shoot the ball. You guys know they call themselves Guard U, and I do think this year is going to be a big season for Bobby Hurley at ASU. In the past, I've been a little skeptical of Bobby Hurley, especially as an in-game coach. He's had many talented teams at Arizona State over the last couple of years that have been all right. It's not like they've been bad, but I do think they've been a little bit disappointing when you compare how they've performed to the expectations. So I have pretty high expectations for this ASU team, and I really hope Coach Hurley doesn't let me down.